I think the school that's successful has a sense of its own identity. It has, in a way, a kind of independent ethos. You know, it's not just a school that you go to. And the name means something. You know, you name the school, it means something. It conjures up, often, an ethos of something that you feel pride in and ownership of. That always goes with strong leadership in my experience. You occasionally got bad schools that had strong leaders, but I never actually came across a good school with a weak leader. So that leadership and ethos is very, very important. And one of the reasons why it's important is this, that, and we found this with the academy schools that we created, which are rather like your charter schools, I think, where there would be a lot of power, a lot of independence for the schools. They were able to innovate and adapt and do new things because they had that sense that they weren't part of a big system. They actually were their own almost self-governing unit. I actually think community or extended schools, the empirical evidence from us is that that works too. And there's a very simple reason for that. What matters to those children is not simply what happens between 9 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That is absolutely clear. In other words, the school should become, if you like, a centre for the support and nurture of the future generation, not simply education in the narrow sense, and a hub for the whole of the community. It should be a resource and a source of strength, not just for the people, the children, the students that go in the school door, but also for the whole of the community. So what we found with our community schools, extended schools as we call them, using the facilities for adult learning. Because actually one of the problems often with parents is that if they've had a poor education, sometimes that is a disadvantage for them, obviously, but it's also a disadvantage for their children when their children are trying to learn. Breakfast clubs, you know, and after-school clubs. Again, for some children, particularly those from problem or disadvantaged families, they may not have breakfast before they get to school. That's a problem for their education. It's a problem for their concentration. It's a problem for the way they behave at school. Youth development, dealing with some of the mental stresses and strains, as well as the physical shortcomings. Making sure, for example, for some kids, they can't go home and do their homework. I mean, it's not possible for them to do that. So you need to provide for that to be done. Now, by the end of next year, as John was saying to you, all our schools will be extended schools. We're actually getting this down to primary school level. And is that junior school? I don't know, whatever we call it. But it's a very, very important part of making education about the whole person and about the whole community. And I think the lesson we learn is that that definitely works and is important to do. Next thing that works, good teachers are really good. Bad teachers shouldn't be teaching. I'm afraid you can't, if people can't do the job properly, it's a problem. And it's a problem for the children that they're teaching. And again, that's difficult to say, but I think it's true. Another thing we learned, partnerships enrich the school. One of the reasons why we created trust schools and academies, and actually virtually all the UK secondary schools now will have partnerships of one sort or another. Now, sometimes they're business partnerships. Sometimes there will be individual philanthropists who will have a relationship with a school. Sometimes they're community organizations. There might be educational trusts. But the fact is, those partnerships, they bring in ideas and energy and creativity. And one of the things we found in opening up our school system was that when these partnerships happen, you know, at first there can be a lot of opposition to them. But actually, after a time, people realize that there's a whole different dimension to doing things and ways of working out there. And schools can benefit from that, just like any other types of institution. Discipline, you've got to have that. I mean, it's an absolutely essential part. I mean, the thing I feel saddest about is when you get youngsters maybe in difficult schools, they want to learn, they simply can't learn without a proper discipline around. Hi. Good to see you. And, you know, if that discipline is there, then they've got a chance of learning. But if it isn't, they don't. Parents need to be engaged and challenged. You know, the fact is, if your parents aren't part of the school community, if they're not in there being talked to, helping, understanding where they've got to step up to the mark as well as the school, it won't work. And finally, a little plea, and I know you're interested in this, sport I think is really important too. I think sport is a major but often underplayed part of giving kids a sense of partnership and responsibility and decency early in life. So, as I say, I think the interesting thing is, whatever the challenges, actually we know what works. You know, that independent, strong ethos, the notion of a community school, the idea that you're going to get the parents properly engaged, that teaching has to have certain standards to it, that there's discipline, that there's the whole child or student is being looked after. So, we know where the challenges are, we kind of know what the solutions are, so what's the strategy to get there? I think I would say these things. First, it actually helps if people understand this is part of a bigger picture. What's happening in government generally, not just in education in the school system, but in government more generally, is that we're moving towards units that are more devolved, where government plays an enabling or strategic role but doesn't try to do everything itself. We're trying to move towards structures that are non-bureaucratic. Actually, in the school system, we're trying to move to situations where we break down some of the traditional demarcations. I mean, occasionally, in our academy schools, like your charter schools, you know, we will have schools that decide, actually, we're going to change our skill mix. It's not simply going to be traditional teachers that we have in here. We may have people who come in, for example, to do arts or culture or sport. We may have people who come in that perhaps are people who give up some of their time to teach kids about the careers that are available to them. You know, it's all part of a system, and you can see this right across public service reform, where government stops being a heavy hand and starts to be a support for the creativity, the innovation, and the leadership capability of the front line. And one of the things that we found, not just in the education field, but right across the piece, was that in today's world, as in so much else, actually your school unit does want to think of itself as having some independence, some freedom to innovate, to be flexible, to offer the best that it can do according to what it thinks. And that actually somebody sitting back in our case, Whitehall, in your case, whatever the equivalent is, and saying, right, you know, we can work out what your school should be doing. You know, here's 500 pages of documentation about what your school should be doing.